Aloha, everyone, and welcome to the Empowered Hour. I am super excited today because I have Dr. Wendy Rouse, and she is an author, and she also does ESD amongst so many other things, and she's about to tell you all of the things that she does. So Wendy, aloha, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Of course, yeah. Where are you in the world?
I'm in California in the Bay Area, San Francisco
Oh,
Bay.
okay. Oh, that's a beautiful place. I love
Yeah,
it.
we're having good weather today. So,
Yeah, great and very artsy too. So can you give a little bit of background about you and your work?
yeah, so I'm a historian by training and I teach history at San Jose State University. And I specialize in women's history and LGBTQ plus history. And I also trained in self-defense and martial arts early on in my life since the time I was a kid. And so that has led me into different research paths as well, researching some of the history of the women's martial arts and self-defense movement.
What got you interested in being a historian? I think that that's really interesting. There's the woman from Outlander. She also is a historian, and she wanted to be an author. So it's interesting paths crossover.
I don't know. I was interested in history from the time I was really, really young. Like I remember, in California, we all do like gold rush projects
Oh,
during yeah. And so we had done like a gold rush project and I just would beg my mom to like take me to all these like nerdy history sites and museums. And she did not really understand why I was obsessed with it. But I just was always interested in history and really didn't think about becoming a historian. I think we're all kind of taught, you're going to be a doctor, lawyer, dentist or something. And so I majored in history because I was interested in it, but to prepare me for maybe becoming an attorney or something like that. And then later on, I decided, oh, I could actually make a career out of studying history and teaching history. So,
really awesome.
yeah.
Did you have a specific, besides what you do now, is there a specific genre in history that you gravitated to?
When I was a kid, it was anything like adventurous and free. Like, so to me, it was like the West and the gold rush. And then I got interested in war and civil war and battles. And so I was always interested in kind of that more, I guess, what we'd call traditional history. And then over time, I became interested in women's history and queer history and history that I hadn't been taught, that I didn't know anything about. And I wanted to know more about.
Yeah. So what were some, I know that you have multiple books. I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about those and also share just what inspired you to make them, because I think that I've read one of them. It's brilliantly put together, and I think that it's important for people to actually hear the why behind things, just in general.
Yeah. Well, I've kind of had an interesting like research path. I basically follow what is interesting to me at that moment. And I had done history, traditional history, and I had a bachelor's degree in history. And I started to be interested in archaeology. And so I actually I was an archaeologist for a period of my career. And I specialized in Gold Rush era archaeology and specifically in Chinese American history and archaeology. And so originally that was my research focus, and I ran excavations and did all sorts of projects around that. And my first book was actually about Chinese American immigrants and their experiences in San Francisco and the gold rush era and the exclusion era and whatnot. But what was interesting is as I was doing that project, it was my dissertation, I kept finding pictures in the old newspapers of women doing self-defense, of women doing martial arts. And this shocked me because I had studied karate from the time I was like 11 years old. And I had never thought that there was much history of women in martial arts. I mean, I knew our teachers were like the first generation. That's what I was told, that they were the first ones to kind of break into the male dominated field of martial arts. So I wasn't really thinking it had much history, much link to that history of women studying. But I came across this image that is now the cover of the book. And it's, look, you can see the woman doing a Palm Hill strike against
No.
a man. And
Okay.
I was like, I had no idea. So I clipped that particular article and I saved it and I did some searching and I found more. And so I put that aside because I was finishing my dissertation, and that became my second book, because I wanted to know about this history of women studying jujitsu and self-defense in the early 1900s and what motivated them. And what I discovered is that there was a whole self-defense movement before what we consider the women's self-defense movement in the 60s and 70s. There was a self-defense movement in the suffrage era of the early 20th century. So that just kind of paralleled my own interest in martial arts. And so I saved that, and then I worked on that later in my career.
It's really cool. And you got involved in self-defense. Is it because of the writing, or was it because of some other reason?
No, I was like 11 years old, and one of my friends said that she had started this karate class through the park system and that I should come to class. And I really wasn't a physical kid. Like, I didn't do sports. I sucked at karate, it's soccer, and I just couldn't really do any kind of physical thing. But Karate Kid was in the theaters around that time, and so everyone was thinking they could do karate. You know, anyone can do it. So I did. I signed up. I went to the classes, and then I stayed, and she didn't. Like, I think she dropped out a few weeks later, and I just kept doing it, and I kind of became like, it became my thing. I loved it. And so I started studying from that point on. And I wasn't any good at it though, like, because I had no like physical natural talent. It took me years to even like get the basics down. And I was that nerdy kid that kind of got picked on a lot in middle school. So it wasn't like it gave me a ton of self-confidence, but it gave me something to be totally like absorbed with and to fall in love with. And so I did that, and I eventually got my black belt in that. And then in college, I shifted. That was Shotokan, which was a traditional Japanese martial art. I shifted to an Okinawan system called Weichi-Ryu. And I started training in that, and eventually was like 4th degree. And I was training for years, and I got my teacher certification. And then I had my own students and started like a club, and then eventually was doing self-defense workshops for women and girls in the community. And so that was kind of my long journey through the martial arts. And that's where the point I was when I found this information on the history of it. You know, I was already years into my 20 plus years into my training.
Yeah. Wow. This is really interesting. Everybody has their own walk into the work that we do. I'm curious, how did you distinguish the stuff that you were learning and transition it into empowerment self-defense? Because I've seen some of your talks in different places, and you definitely come from more of an empowerment based focus.
Yeah, so I didn't start that way. I started just traditional martial arts, right? And when I was teaching kids, I was teaching young women. And when I was teaching them, I realized that they needed more practical techniques. They loved the martial arts and they were catching it on fast and they were thriving, but I wanted them to have practical stuff. So I started by reading, because my teachers had, they were doing the basic, typical martial arts strikes. They didn't have all the context for the larger types of verbal and nonverbal self-defense and all the different techniques. So I started reading anything I could. And that's when I discovered some of the feminist self-defense books of the early of the 1970s, and then all the way up through the 90s. So I was reading those to get some idea of how can I teach the broader kind of self-defense curriculum. And I still really wasn't getting what I felt like they needed, which was more practical advice for day-to-day life, right? Not just the physical techniques. And around that time, I met some folks. I met Nikki Smith, who does judo in Sacramento. And Nikki said, you should come to PAMA, which is this Pacific Area Women's Martial Artists organization. And because, we have all these seminars in self-defense. And so I actually got interested in it. I learned a lot more from going to that and from going to NWMAF, and what exactly like their approach to empowerment self-defense was. And so I started adding some of that into the curriculum. But also I think it was like my feminism was developing, right? Because through teaching and learning history, I realized the experiences of women throughout time, and kind of the system of oppression that women had experienced at different periods of time and still experience to this day. And that started to inform my teaching, because I realized that the problems that women were describing 100 years ago still exist in our society. And so I started thinking about, well, how can we deconstruct that? What do we have to do to move forward? And so that was a lot of what was informing my research and also my martial arts self-defense teaching at the time.
Nice. Yeah. I always think about this with students. So do you have a success story with one of the students, or with you, that you would like to share based off of the training?
Yeah, well, I would have students, the biggest success, I think, was just like individual levels, right? I would see students who were very passive and afraid from their own experiences in life, their own traumatic experiences in life. And they would come in and I would teach them something very simple. And within a few weeks, they would just be transformed. And it was just as simple as, like breaking a board or something that was, and it was just gave them this sense of empowerment that I realized just how transformative this could be. This physical transformation had this extensive impact on their personal transformation. And I saw that over and over again, because I was teaching a class that was semester to semester. So that I'd get one group of students in, and by the end, I had these kids that were just ready to go. And then I'd have another group, and they'd go through that same transformation over and over again. And so I think witnessing that over and over again made me realize just how much we could do to move us forward in some senses by just adding that physical aspect as well as that personal empowerment aspect. And so I think it was a series of little success stories.
Nice. Yeah. I love working with my students and just seeing their faces light up after they've got it, So you had said that basically you were doing the research, and 100 years ago, dealing with a lot of the same stuff that we're dealing with now. How do we change that?
Well, I think we have to recognize it first. So women 100 years ago were talking about street harassment, right? That they're walking down the street and they're facing catcalls and inappropriate comments. People are sexually harassing them. They're physically harassing them. They're assault. And these are women who are just experiencing, for the first time, many of them, the freedom to even be able to walk down the streets. Because for so long, especially middle-class women, were told, you need to stay in the house. You need to, your place is in the home, and that men's place is in the public sphere. And so I think reading these stories of these women who were being told that the reason they were facing this kind of assault and harassment on the streets was because they needed to go back home, just resonated, because we've heard this over and over again throughout history, right? You think of the 1950s and the women who were told that, your place is in the home. And then you think about today and you think that we still experience this street harassment and assault. And what is the underlying message there? And it's that this isn't safe for us. This isn't our place. Mm-hmm. And so I think that is part of the story that keeps being told over and over again in different ways. And so it's really a lot about how we need to claim our space and embrace our rights to occupy public sphere just as much as men have those rights as well.
Absolutely. So can you have your book. I wanted people to see it. There you go. And where are places that they can get this book?
This book is available pretty much anywhere you shop for books. So you could go to Bookshop to support your independent bookstore. It's online on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and through the university website at New York University Press.
Okay. Yeah, because I know for my professors back in my undergraduate program, they would always have these different specialty books that we would, read through, and it was always really fascinating. We do reports on them. So that seems like one of those books that would be great for that.
Yeah, totally.
So I wanted to just see, for young girls growing up now, what is a message that you have for them?
Well, I mean, I'm sure I know you do a lot of these interviews, and I'm sure people have a lot of amazingly brilliant things to say. The only thing that I really want to stress is that it's important to know our history, because I'm a historian. I feel like I need to say that. We need to understand where we came from, and we need to understand where we're going. And so to do that, we need to understand the experiences of people in the past, especially of women in the past, and where those lessons can take us in the future. And so I would just encourage everyone, especially young people, to learn their history, queer people to learn their history. A lot of the things that we're seeing now are echoes of the past. And so in order to move forward, we have to know what happened before us.
Absolutely. What kind of advice would you have given to yourself if you could, way back?
To be less afraid, because I was always, nervous about everything. And I think to go forth and, be bold and try new things and live life, because it's short and we only have so much time here. And so we need to embrace things. And part of that is needing to feel safe. And so training in martial arts, training in self-defense helps us feel safe to be able to live that more bold life.
Absolutely. Wendy, thank you so much for coming on. Did you have anything else that you wanted to share with the audience before we head out?
No, that's it. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Aloha.